All right, so today you're going to be looking into digital security
Mm-hmm.
and more specifically, texting.
Okay.
The kind that you probably use like 100 times a day on your phone.
Yeah.
You might have seen those headlines that were like, FBI warns users to stop texting.
Yeah.
Um,
I saw that.
Now, things aren't quite that dire,
Right.
but there is a genuine security concern when it comes to texting between iPhones and Androids.
Yeah, and that kind of throws a wrench into, the whole like celebration we had
Really?
when Apple finally decided to adopt RCS.
Right.
We thought we were on the fast track to like a universal texting experience.
Yeah.
Turns out we might have traded security for all those like fancy features.
Yeah, it's like, how is it 2024 and we still haven't figured out how to make texting secure
Yeah.
across different phones?
It's a head scratcher.
Right. And this isn't just some like, theoretical what if scenario.
Right.
We saw with the Salt Typhoon cyber attack.
Oh, yeah.
What's at stake? Chinese hackers targeting U.S. telecom networks, potentially scooping up tons of data.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's got to be a wake-up call, right?
Absolutely. Now, Salt Typhoon is a pretty, extreme example,
Okay.
but it illustrates a vulnerability that's been lurking in the shadows for years.
Right.
And this wasn't about, some super sophisticated hack into your phone itself.
Yeah.
It exploited a weakness in the global telecom system.
Okay.
Something called SS7.
Yeah, I think a lot of our listeners probably know, the basics of SS7.
Right.
It's been a security concern for a while.
Yeah.
But what's baffling is why this vulnerability is still around.
Mm-hmm.
Is it technically impossible to fix?
Yeah.
Or is there something else going on?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
Technically speaking, there are ways to mitigate the SS7 issue,
Okay.
but it requires a massive coordinated effort from telecom providers worldwide.
Right.
And, let's face it, the telecom industry isn't exactly known for its lightning-fast adoption
Yeah,
of new security protocols.
for sure.
There are also economic factors at play.
Right.
Upgrading infrastructure costs money,
Mm-hmm.
and those costs inevitably trickle down to consumers.
Right. So it's like this tangled web of technical challenges and financial incentives.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, our text messages are caught in the crossfire.
Right.
But hold on. Let's go back to Salt Typhoon for a second.
Okay.
You said they were potentially scooping up data,
Right.
but not necessarily the content of our messages.
Exactly. Think of it like this. Imagine someone looking at your phone bill,
Okay.
but not reading your actual texts.
Okay.
They can see who you called,
Right.
when, for how long,
Yeah.
even your general location based on cell tower data.
Uh-huh.
That's metadata.
Yep.
And it's a goldmine of information even without seeing the content of your conversations.
So metadata is like the digital equivalent of someone snooping through your mail
Mm-hmm.
and noting down who you're sending letters to,
Right.
but not actually opening them.
Yeah.
Okay, that's creepy. But in the case of Salt Typhoon,
Yeah.
some people did have their actual messages compromised, didn't they?
Yeah, that's true. A small group of individuals,
Okay.
primarily those in government and political circles,
Uh-huh.
did have the content of their calls and texts accessed.
Okay.
And this brings us back to the heart of our deep dive,
Okay.
the vulnerability of cross-platform texting.
And here's where it gets really head-scratching.
Mm-hmm.
Both Apple and Google champion end-to-end encryption
Yeah,
within their own messaging ecosystems.
right.
iMessage is locked down.
Mm-hmm.
Google Message is secure.
Right.
But the second you try to send a text between an iPhone and an Android,
Yeah,
that encryption vanishes.
it's gone.
It's like building a fortress with a giant hole in the wall.
Yeah, it's a strange situation.
Yeah.
They've gone to great lengths to secure their own platforms.
Right.
But the bridge between them is still wide open.
Right.
And that's what makes this issue so relevant to everyone listening. Think about it. How often do you text someone with a different type of phone?
Oh, probably every day.
Yeah.
And until now, I've never really thought twice about it.
Right.
But if I'm understanding this correctly,
Mm-hmm.
that means those conversations are potentially vulnerable.
Potentially, yeah.
It seems like the FBI and CISA are basically saying,
Mm-hmm.
hey, if you want truly secure communications,
Mm-hmm.
stick to apps that offer end-to-end encryption across the board.
That's the gist of it.
And it makes you wonder, why isn't that the standard for all texting?
Yeah.
What are the technical hurdles preventing this from happening?
That's a great question. And it leads us to an even bigger conversation.
Okay.
About the balance between security and privacy.
Mm-hmm.
We keep hearing this term responsible encryption being thrown around.
Right.
What exactly does that mean?
Right.
And is it even possible?
Yeah. Is that even possible?
We'll have to see.
Okay.
So responsible encryption is basically the idea that law enforcement should have some way to access encrypted data, even if it's through like a backdoor or a special key.
Yep.
And the argument is that this is necessary to like investigate crimes and prevent terrorism.
But isn't that like saying we want a safe with a secret combination
Right.
that only we know?
Yeah.
Doesn't that defeat the purpose?
That's the main point of contention.
Right.
Privacy advocates argue that any backdoor, no matter how well-intentioned, weakens the entire system. It creates a vulnerability that hackers could exploit.
Yeah.
And once that door's open, who's to say it won't be abused or expanded?
Right. So we're basically stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, kinda.
We need security to protect our data, but we also need law enforcement to be able to do their jobs.
Right.
Is there any way to reconcile these two?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right.
And it's a question that's going to be debated for years to come.
Okay.
There are some who believe that technical solutions can be found, ways to provide access to encrypted data without compromising the overall security of the system.
Okay.
Others are more skeptical, arguing that any attempt to weaken encryption is a slippery slope that will ultimately lead to less security, not more.
Right. Speaking of slippery slopes.
Oh, yeah.
We can't ignore the chat control debate happening in Europe right now. They're trying to force tech companies to scan for illegal content.
Right.
Like child abuse material.
Yeah.
How does that tie into this whole encryption conversation?
It's a perfect example of how the desire for security and control can sometimes clash with privacy rights.
Right.
The intention behind chat control is understandable. No one wants child exploitation to go unpunished.
Of course.
But the methods being proposed raise some serious concerns.
Because if you can scan for one type of content, you can scan for anything.
Exactly. Where do you draw the line?
Yeah, where do you draw the line?
And what happens when governments start demanding access
Right.
to encrypted messages for reasons that have nothing to do with criminal activity?
Right.
What about political dissidents or journalists working on sensitive stories?
Yeah, it's like...
Suddenly that safe with the secret combination doesn't seem so safe anymore.
No, it doesn't.
Right.
And it highlights why this whole debate about encryption is so important.
It is.
It's not just about technology. It's about fundamental rights and freedoms.
Absolutely. And it's a conversation that's happening right now as we speak.
Wow.
There's a Senate hearing scheduled for December 11th, where they'll be discussing the Salt Typhoon attack and the broader issue of cybersecurity in the telecom industry.
So it sounds like things are about to get pretty heated.
I think so.
What are you expecting to hear from lawmakers?
I think we'll hear a lot of tough questions.
Okay.
And maybe even some finger pointing.
Okay.
Lawmakers are under pressure to do something to prevent future attacks.
Right.
And responsible encryption might seem like an easy solution. But hopefully they'll also listen to the concerns of privacy advocates and security experts who warn about the unintended consequences of weakening encryption.
Well, as someone who sends way too many text messages, I'm definitely going to be paying close attention to that hearing.
Yeah, it's going to be an important one.
Yeah. In the meantime, what can we do to protect ourselves?
All right.
It feels like we're at the mercy of these larger forces, governments, tech companies, hackers. Is there anything we can actually control?
There is, and it starts with making informed choices about the technology we use. Remember, you have the power to decide where you put your trust and how you communicate.
So it's not about abandoning texting altogether.
Not necessarily, but it is about understanding the limitations of standard texting, especially when you're communicating with someone who has a different type of phone.
Right. Okay.
If you're concerned about privacy, there are alternatives.
Like WhatsApp and Signal, which we talked about earlier.
Exactly.
They both offer end-to-end encryption by default for all users.
Yep. Regardless of platform.
Regardless of platform.
Okay. And while no system is 100% foolproof, using an app with strong encryption adds an extra layer of protection.
Okay.
It's like choosing to lock your door even though you live in a safe neighborhood.
It's about minimizing risk and taking control of your own digital security.
Exactly.
I like that it's empowering.
Yeah.
But let's be realistic. Not everyone is going to switch to a new messaging app.
Right.
Just because we told them to.
Of course not.
So what about those folks who are sticking with standard texting?
Yeah.
What advice do you have for them? It's like we're saying, hey, be aware that the house you're living in might have some flimsy locks.
Right.
you could move to a more secure house. But if you're staying put, at least be extra careful about who you let in.
Exactly. And for those who choose to stick with standard texting, there's still some precautions you can take. First and foremost, be mindful of what you're texting about. Avoid sharing sensitive personal information, like your social security number, bank account details, or password.
Common sense stuff.
Yeah.
But sometimes we forget that even like seemingly harmless information can be pieced together to create a pretty detailed profile of who we are and what we do.
Exactly. And be wary of suspicious links or attachments. Just like you would with any email or online message.
For sure.
It's always better to err on the side of caution.
And this is where Apple's upcoming iOS update comes into play.
Oh, yeah?
They're finally letting users change their default messaging app.
Interesting.
So even if you're an iPhone user, you won't be stuck with iMessage.
Okay.
If you want to use something more secure for cross-platform texting.
It's a small step, but a significant one. It gives users more control and flexibility, which is always a good thing.
I agree.
And hopefully it'll put some pressure on other tech companies to prioritize security and interoperability.
It's like Apple is saying, hey, we get it. You want more options. Here you go. But at the same time, the security landscape is getting even more complex with things like Salt Typhoon. And the push for responsible encryption.
It's almost overwhelming, isn't it?
It can feel that way. But remember, we're not powerless in this situation.
No, we're not.
We have a voice.
We do.
And we can use it to demand better protections from both the government and the tech industry.
Absolutely.
You mentioned that FCC proposal.
Oh, yeah.
That would require telecom providers to get annual cybersecurity certifications. Do you think that will actually make a difference?
It's a step in the right direction.
Okay.
At the very least, it will force these companies to take security more seriously.
Right.
But real change will require like a multifaceted approach. We need stronger regulations, better enforcement, and more transparency from tech companies about how they're handling our data.
And let's not forget about education.
Right.
We need to empower users to make informed choices about their own digital security.
Yeah. That's why these conversations are so important.
That's why these deep dives are so important.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the wild world of texting and encryption, I want to leave you with this thought.
Okay.
The future of digital security isn't something that's just happening to us.
Right.
It's something we're actively shaping with every choice we make.
Every app we download. Every message we send, every conversation we have about these issues, it all contributes to the kind of digital world we're creating.
So be informed.
Be engaged.
Be proactive. Your privacy depends on it.
Absolutely. And remember, you don't have to navigate this complex landscape alone. There are resources available, experts you can turn to, and a growing community of people who care about digital privacy just as much as you do.
So stay curious, stay vigilant, and stay connected.